All right, so caulking. There's all the types of tools and easier ways to go about doing this. This can be a stressful part of the project. You just spend so much time doing this entire project. You don't want to screw it up at the caulking stage. A bad caulking job can really ruin a nice tile job. So I'm going to go over a couple tips on how to go about doing this. And it really does come down to using 100% silicone, using some spray to keep it from smearing, and then using a good caulking tool to be able to scrape the appropriate amount. Now, I would recommend to also have acetone on hand. This is just in case you screw up. You can always fix your joints. You can always go and scrape everything off, clean up your mess, and then start over again. So just know that this isn't just a one-time thing. You have ability to go back and redo it in a short period of time. But we're going to be using the same matching caulk as the grout, and this is the Ardex, and I always recommend doing the 100% silicone. That really is the best way to go. Any of the acrylics just don't last as long, and I always say every caulking joint is a maintenance issue. It's going to fail eventually, and you're going to have to caulk it again. Whereas the grout, ends up mostly staying pretty nice, especially if you use a good quality grout like epoxy or other types that don't stain. So caulking is always something that needs to be maintained. In my experience, every 5 to 6 years, you end up having to redo the caulking joint. So that being said, I really do primarily only do 2 main areas of caulking in a shower. Now, there are recommendations by the TCNA that say that you have to caulk every single plane of change. Every single angle of the shower should be caulked in the corner. That's good advice. I just don't primarily do it at the shower floor, and I don't do it around my recessed niches. I like these to look really, really nice and clean. And these are small areas that don't really have a problem. If you use a good quality grout, you really shouldn't have an issue with cracking in those corners. But these vertical seams, that's where anytime I've ever gotten a call back in the last 20 years, it's always been this vertical seam because the 2 walls kind of have a little bit of movement on either one. And then the other thing I'm going to be doing is actually the ceiling as well. This is a basement bathroom. So there's going to be, people are walking upstairs, so there's going to be a little bit of deflection in those joists. And I think it's going to be important to caulk these corners as well, because grout would most likely end up cracking in those corners just from the movement of the ceiling. So my first tip is, number 1, get a caulkless gun. So it doesn't look like much, I've been using it for years, but this is a newborn caulking gun, dripless. Anything that you can just basically stop using the trigger and it stops oozing the stuff out is kind of the kind of caulking gun that you want to use. It just makes it a little bit less frustrating. But my first tip would be just to evaluate what your largest gap is in the corner and then kind of reference that with the tip of your gun. So I have a gap here. It looks maybe it's about 3/16 of an inch. So I'm just going to start out small. You can always start out small on your tips and then cut it bigger if you need to add more silicone. But once you cut the tip too big, you're kind of stuck with what you got. And what your goal is basically to fill the entire joint, obviously, but also not to apply too much where you're making too much of a smear marking. But that's where this Windex is going to come into play. So let's go ahead and do this joint going all the way up. So that's probably my biggest joint right here. So I'm going to match basically the tip of my gun to the width of that. Okay, so just make sure that everything's clean and dry. Any water on anything is going to make this silicone not stick very well. So make sure you took the time to scrape out your joint. And really, it is ideal to have a gap in between your towel and the corner, because this will actually ooze into the corner and create a stronger joint. So having a little bit of, making sure that everything's cleared out in those joints, there isn't any thin set. It's just better to be able to go into that joint. It just makes a longer lasting joint. So we're gonna go ahead and do this vertical seam first. And we're just gonna try to be as consistent as possible and just filling that entire caulking joint. Now this is, having all these grout joints do kind of make things a little bit frustrating because you have a little divot on every little section here, and that kind of makes it a little bit tougher to basically squeegee out any excess silicone. But rest assured, with a good caulking gun and some spray, we shouldn't have too much caulking that overhangs the joint. Okay, so it's fully caulked there now. There's a lot of caulking tools out there. This is a pretty traditional one you can get at the box stores. This is made by Anvil. So it has two different tips, like a wider round one here and then a sharper corner one here. It also acts as a scraper too. It has like a little scraping tool. These things work great, nothing wrong with that. You also have these ones that have all like these different types of shapes on the edges, so you can really kind of fine tune what you want to, you can even have like a really wide round look or a very sharp corner. But these things I found, these are like little spatulas, and they're kind of like replicate a finger. It's probably about as big as my finger. And what's great about these is that they're flexible, and you can just basically remove the excess grout, and the flexibility kind of scrapes against the tile, which works out great. I love these. I really thought these were a really cool idea. So you just want to spray the joint with plenty of Windex, and I would recommend getting the stuff that's clear. This is just with vinegar, because the stuff the blue stuff has a dye in it, and it could cause problems with your grout or just kind of rest on the tile, because we're not going to be able to wipe everything down on the edges. We're just going to be able to just basically pull the joint and then clean up things later. So make sure you have plenty of paper towels with you, and then we'll go ahead and use this little fake finger to scrape off the excess silicone.
I still think your finger's better.
Yeah, I know. Well, this will get...
What's wrong?
No, I just don't like the way this top joint's looking here. It's just smearing. Now, that's the problem with some of these, having so many grout joints really makes it problematic to get it off the side of the tile, and some of these are fairly recessed, so even with a caulking tool, it doesn't want to remove it. So you're gonna, anytime you try to finger it, you should definitely try to use the Windex to kind of keep it from smearing on the tile. I mean, this dark tile definitely shows everything. So this is not like an easy grout or caulking joint. It's like the first caulk joint is always like kind of the test to see what tool's really going to work the best. And I'm thinking that I might just use my finger on the next one completely. It might actually come out a little bit more cleanly. I don't like any of this stuff at the top here. I'm gonna scrape out all this stuff at the top. I don't like it. Just use a little acetone. All right, so we'll let that dry. Come back to that here in a minute. I just didn't like the way that top joint was ultimately looking, but I think the rest of this looks all right. We'll come back to the other wall here in a minute, but let's go ahead and caulk this one. That's actually not working too bad. This has a little bit of a stiffer deal here. Yeah, I actually like that one. That one's working the best. This Anvil, I think it's going to do the trick here, because it's really stiff. It's like not flexible like that other one. So I'm actually able to put as much pressure as I can. I wish this could be just a quick thing. Everybody on Instagram shows you doing this stuff. Just one caulk joint straight down. Everything's perfect right away. Use a popsicle stick. Let's get it perfect the first shot. It's never really been my experience. I mean, there are some, you know, big format tile that work out great because you got basically a smooth surface all the way around. But when you have all these grout joints, it just wants to smear. All right, I think I could live with that. All right, I think that looks all right.
Took you almost an hour.
What a nightmare. All these grout joints, dark tile, makes it really tough. You gotta take your time at doing this though. You know, I'm gonna try to improve on technique to make this easier, but sometimes you just fight it all the way through. All these little grooves really made a real problem smearing on here. So, trying to add value to help you out with this, but sometimes it is nothing but a struggle. And you just have to bear through it to get the look that you want. So, allot some time to be able to take care of this properly, and you'll get good results. It's just an important detail to make look right, or it's gonna really look awful. But
Well, yeah, no. It'll
you know, at the end of the day, the epoxy being in those joints probably would have lasted a very long time.